Hey everyone, welcome, Mr. Hancock here. Alright, so this video is going to introduce you to Romanticism, but in the process I'm going to kind of show you, take you over to Unit 2 into Week 5 for a minute. Anyway, so here we go. Click on over to Course Content. Here we are, Unit 2. The one thing I want to mention about this right now is that we do have to write, and you should know by already from the intro videos and the syllabus, we do have to write a literary analysis research essay for this class. Unit 2 is the introduction to that. The content in which you will write the essay will be from Unit 2. However, the essay won't be due until the end of the semester. I will have a separate video on that later, so keep your eye open for that. Regardless, here we go. Unit 2, Romanticism. Alright, so again, I'll have a video on this in a little while, but this module is about the literary analysis. But I want to click into Week 5 instead and just give you a basic overview and introduction to Romanticism. Alrighty, checklist, objectives, lecture notes. Here we go. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is click into Romantic Study Points. The British Romanticism handout, let me go ahead and click that too, just kind of show you what's going on here. This gives you a little bit of a background and talks about some really famous writers. We're going to read Blake. We're going to read Wordsworth. We're not going to touch Coleridge. We're not going to touch Percy Shelley, even though Frankenstein's written by his wife, Mary Shelley. And we will read John Keats, okay? So anyway, you can read that, and I want to talk about that in my own way in just a few minutes. But mainly I want to click the Romantic Study Points. But before I do, and there's also a handout about Frankenstein. But anyway, okay, so for these study points, I want to mention to you really quick while I have this here. What do we have with Romanticism? First off, you have to understand is that, there was no, just like any other trends, I guess you can think about now, music trends, clothing trends, hair trends, you never really saw that distinct change from one thing to the next, really. But if you look back 10 years ago or 20 years ago, you can see completely different styles of music. Hairs, like I said, hair, clothes, all that kind of stuff. So, but at the moment, you never saw that. It just kind of blended together. Well, romantic or literary movements and philosophical movements do the same thing. There's never just one spot where one ends and another begins. So Enlightenment blended and changed over eventually into Romanticism. So there were Romantics, writing and talking about stuff during the Enlightenment, and even afterwards. Still, there were leftovers from the Enlightenment, Age of Reason, into the Romantic period. However, what we do see with the Romantics, and you can see the due dates here, or the dates, is that the Romanticism was a complete rejection of Enlightenment ideals in a way. So go back and think, when you look at these study points, these are things that we see being championed instead of the opposite items inside the Enlightenment and so on, especially the idea of an age of reason, okay? So when we go and look at this, all of your readings in the Romantic period, consider them against this backdrop. Look at this right here, and I promise you, you'll see so many of these jump out. And it's very important. As a matter of fact, I say they were the original hippies, the original tree huggers, and, that stereotypical term that's been used in the past, and literally in some cases. Because, as you can see here, there's so much more of a movement to the person, his or herself here instead of the collective. So anyway, let's talk about these points. So when we moved into the Romantics, what we're starting to see now is a focus now not on the collective, not on the group as a whole, not on like what we saw in like talking about societies and peoples as a group, like that famous line that Spock is associated with Mr. Spock on Star Trek is the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, meaning that there is a focus more on the collective, on the community, on the large part of people, not just the individual. So your individual feelings and all that stuff doesn't matter. What matters is the big part of it all. Okay, excuse my stuttering. But with Romantics, it's complete opposite. We now have a focus of literature and philosophical thought. It's focusing on the person and what the person experiences and what the person does and how the person grows and so on. Okay, so the individual is very, very important here. Number 2, and this is a big one because you can kind of see I got it broken into 3 parts here. Number 2, nature. Dealing directly with nature, okay? First off, there's a major appreciation for nature and everything that is natural, okay? We're starting to see in this area here of movement People are starting to move from the agrarian in the country kind of society, especially with the explosion of the Industrial Revolution that we'll see later. People are starting to move into the urban areas, and it's starting to get, crowded and bad things, kind of like what you saw with Swift. Really tough living, really emphasized a lot worse later with like writings of Charles Dickens and so on like that. But we're starting to see now there with the Romantics that there is a really, really deep appreciation for not man-made stuff, but more of the natural order of things, natural growth, and nature itself, okay? And so that's something that's very important. And to them, it gets to almost a religious aspect to where, and you'll see this with Wordsworth, is that the closer you are to nature, the closer you are to God. He was a pantheist, meaning he saw God in everything, in trees and so on. Not just you think, oh, that's a creation from God, but literally God is in that. So we see that there's a religious aspect to it and everything. So the closer you are to nature, more pure you are, more uncorrupted you are, more innocent you are, the closer you are to God. And the better you see things in the world, the better you are in every single way. You can see true beauty, godly beauty, all this stuff like that. But also through that, we see through like people like Wordsworth as well, is that nature is also considered the greatest teacher. We can learn some wonderful worldly things through man-made education, and so on. But what matters is the real, true, natural education you can get through nature. Okay, Wordsworth had a poem called Expostulation and Reply. And another one, the turn of the tables. Along those lines, I'm tripped on my tongue there. But anyway, it's a conversation away between two people. One friend's like, "Hey man, why are you sitting on that log over there?" He didn't say it like that. But why are you sitting over in that log over there, staring at the trees? You need to get up, get your school books, and let's go to school and learn something, make something of ourselves. And the reply is, "No, I don't need that garbage. True education, true growth for me is laying right here on this. I can learn everything I need about true natural living in life as a being through nature, through everything that I'm around right now." So there's a really strong belief here that nature is the teacher, is the true teacher of humanity. And then I kind of mentioned this before, there is clearly in many places a battle between nature, the natural, the good, the innocent, and the corruption of civilization. Wordsworth also pushes this one in other poems as well that we're not going to get to read. But the further we grow up, or the more we grow up, the older we get, the further from nature, further from God, less innocent, more corrupted by the world we get. And so that affects us in every way. It affects us morally, affects us spiritually, affects on how we see beauty and how we perceive things. Just think in terms of how a child sees things compared to how an adult sees things. And so that's where that goes. Now, number 3, moving on, art and emotion over logic. There's a push here, especially with Keats, of something we call the aesthetic. That is art for art's sake. When we're looking at art, we're just enjoying art, not because there's got to be some big, massive, deep meaning, or there's a logical connection to it that I've got to really turn into something big. It's just that I'm going to look at art and enjoy it because it's art, because I find beauty in it in some way. Beauty is truth, truth, beauty. That's a big line we see in Ode on a Grecian Urn. So that's especially something there. Something we do see, though, with Keats is that he really does push the idea, moving into number 4, about imagination. With imagination is really big with the Romantics. How powerful imagination is, how you can get lost in it and make anything in your own imagination. Especially Coleridge was big with this, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. But Keats pushes the idea that while imagination is awesome and it's one of the greatest things that we have, getting lost in it can be a bad thing. We see that with the La Belle Dame poem. So take a look at that and keep that in mind. When you read Frankenstein, the novel, it is all of these points. I think you can really dig around and find all of these points in some form or fashion, okay? As a matter of fact, I'm going to do something extremely unprofessional and step out of camera shot here. Bring this over. I think this is an older version of the Frankenstein. You may have a newer one now, but still, I want to point out to you that when you buy this, it's really cheap. But when you buy this, this is not the entire book. Okay, this is also full of all kinds of all kinds of different like critical pieces and things like that. So this is not the entire book. Matter of fact, the book is only about I've got so many notes in this. The book is actually only about this big compared to the entire thing. So like a fraction, maybe a quarter of this actual book is actually Frankenstein, okay? So anyway, that's Romanticism, all right? Look for these points. You can Google tons of stuff, tons of videos, tons of PowerPoints and stuff on YouTube for this stuff. But this is what you need for now. Knowing this is what's going on, what they're trying to champion, you look on your own. You find it. You see where you see it and tell us about it. Don't use the discussion boards of journals to go and show us all this wonderful stuff you learn from all these other websites. I don't care about that. That's not going to get you points. What's going to get you points, what I care about, is seeing that you read it and you process the content. That's what I want, okay? So don't try to impress anybody and give all this history and name drop and all that kind of stuff. Don't care about that. You read the piece and you tell us what you see in the piece according to the topic of the discussion or journal, okay, y'all? So anyway, there's that. Let me go back over here for a second. All right, Frankenstein. All right. I've only got a few minutes left, so let me mention this. Okay, so you'll notice here, these are specific things we do see inside of Frankenstein. Frankenstein novel is amazing. It's way better than any movie it's ever made, and I'm not one of those hipster folks that think the books are better than the movies, because that's not always the case. But I can tell you right now, number one, the book is better than the movie. Number two, the movies are completely different than what the book shows. The monster is not some big square-head, bolt-neck green guy walking around. He can't move or talk like a monster. It's not that at all. It's very interesting how Mary Shelley really portrays the villain. I use air quotes if you can see that there. So keep that in mind. Here are some possible things to keep in mind, all right? It is the quintessential romantic novel. If you look through it, you can see all those, and evidence after piece of evidence, all that stuff. As far as all of those romantic points, you can see it throughout the novel. It is a page-turner. You won't be able to put it down. The beginning is a little boring, but just understand that when you start the beginning, it starts on a boat in the ice up north, and they see people running around in the ice, and they catch one, not catch, but they find Victor Frankenstein falling over about dead. So when they pull him onto the boat and get him well, they get the story of what happened that led up to that point. So it's kind of like the main story of Frankenstein is like a flashback as to how Frankenstein got there and who's running around chasing who on that ice out there. And so that's going to give you a lot of great background. So once that starts, understand that's how the book begins. But once you get into the story, oh, you can't stop. It's amazing. It's a really, really good book. So consider these points, but also consider the points, the romantic points as you read forward, okay? So anyway, week 5 and week 6 is going to be over Frankenstein, okay? So each week you're going to have to read half of that book, all right? So get to reading. Start early and get to reading. So you're going to have to start reading all that. You'll have the book done in 2 weeks. The other 2 weeks will be devoted towards the poems, the poetry, all right? Here's the good news about the unit exam. The Unit 2 exam, like you just did for Unit 1, it will only cover the poems. It will not cover Frankenstein. Frankenstein is devoted for the literary analysis. So I'll have, like I said, I'll have a video on that. But what you're doing right now is you're reading Frankenstein, you're preparing Frankenstein for the essay that you have to go forward. The poems, like Wordsworth, Keats, and I think I might have Burns. I might have throw some other things in there too. But those are going to, and Blake, those are going to focus, those will be used inside the actual unit exam, okay? Do it midterm. So anyway, there's that. Keep an eye open for the next video for the literary analysis, okay? And if you have any questions, let me know.